Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here to do a video review of the Rokinon or Samyang Tilt Shift 24mm f3.5 lens. I was excited when this particular lens was announced because it seemed to me to be a very natural fit. Tilt shift lenses are, by their very nature, typically manual focus only lenses, and of course that has been the niche for Rokinon and Samyang, who have produced to this point lenses that come without autofocus and are always manual focus. The strengths of this particular brand have always been that they produce at a lower price point lenses with manual focus, yes, but great optics. And so I thought, wow, what a natural fit, because tilt shift lenses are by their nature more of a niche item. And they tend to be expensive. The Canon equivalent, the 24mm f3.5 Mark II, is around $2,000, and so they're not cheap. And so unless a person is actually doing a lot of architectural shooting, or in some cases using them for landscape purposes, there are very few people that are willing to make that kind of investment. So again, I thought, what a natural fit. I was sure that Rokinon would undercut the price point of the Canon lens, and in that case that was true. But unfortunately, I was disappointed with this particular lens, and I'll elaborate on why in just a moment. Now, my purpose today is not to try to give any kind of exhaustive information on how and why tilt shift lenses work and how they operate. And there are plenty of sources on the internet to find more detailed information on how to properly operate a tilt shift lens. But I will say that tilt shift lenses are very popular because they can do a few things that other lenses cannot do. Number one, they are obviously great for architectural purposes. The ability to either tilt or shift the lens along the focal plane allows a unique ability with a tilt shift lens to produce very straight lines for architectural purposes. And that, of course, is a huge asset if that is your goal. It allows lines that should be straight to look so, and to prevent that often leaning effect that occurs with lenses that don't have this functionality. In recent years, Adobe has introduced a feature onto their software that they call Upright. And Upright actually works quite well, but it comes at a cost. You will lose a good portion of your image as you correct the distorted geometry. And so as it crops down, you will lose a lot of the width of your actual lens. And so tilt shift lenses are very popular because they allow you to do in camera and achieve the full 24, in this case, the full 24 millimeters angle of view, which is a huge asset over another 24 millimeter lens that when you've corrected it, you will have probably achieved an angle of view it's closer to a 35 to 40 millimeter lens. They're also very popular for creative depth of field work, and again, tilting or shifting the lens, or both, as you can do with this, allow you to do basically unlimited amount of creative options for achieving different depth of field effects. And a very popular application of that is the miniature effect that often cameras will try to imitate through software. Software, of course, imitates this in a lot of ways, but anyone who actually has used a tilt shift lens will tell you that the results you can achieve with an actual lens are far more organic and aesthetically pleasing than what can be achieved through software. Now, looking at the lens itself, the build quality, as is probably true with most Samyang or Rokinon lenses, is good but not great. There's nothing necessarily that is negative here. It's primarily a plastic construction, but it feels solid, and good materials are used here. It also, the one thing I did note is that there's just something about the feel of the aperture ring, where the detention where it springs into each aperture, to me it feels a little bit plasticky, for lack of better words, and so I feel like there could be an issue there long term. At the actual mechanism here where the tilt and shift controls are, I find that the lens is a little bit blocky through this area, and you'll also find, depending on your camera body, that in certain positions you may find that it's somewhat restrictive where knobs are coming in close to where your hands should be in operation. I also want to point out that the knobs, and there are 4 knobs on here along with 2 switches that allow the rotation, but the knobs tend to, they're plastic and they feel somewhat plastic, and that's particularly true of the locking knobs, and they are differentiated by being gray and being a bit smaller than the black knobs that are used for the actual tilt shift movement. And so, as a result, I know, for example, that Roger at Lens Rentals has commented that tilt shift lenses, even the Canon variations, often will come in damaged because people have forgotten to loosen the tightening knobs and have tried to force it into effect and end up breaking something in the tilt shift mechanism. So that just gives me a bit of a pause for concern when they have a plasticky feel already, that there is obviously a potential for damaging them. Another irritation in the operation of this particular lens is that when you loosen it up enough for operation, if your desire is, for example, to be coming up into a shift, that if you're not very careful with the tension on the knob, there's no friction that remains, and so it will just drop down into its lowest position. And so actually, for use in the field, it can be a bit of an annoyance in that way. One of the other great applications of a tilt shift lens is for doing quick and accurate panoramas. The ability to shift the lens to the right and then to the center and then over to the left allows you to get a very wide angle of view that when you go to stitch them in post, they're almost perfectly aligned. Of course, it's very important when using a tilt shift lens to use it on a tripod, and because of the kind of finicky nature of the various things, you're going to get much more consistent results when using it on a tripod. Another strength for this lens, a 0.34 times magnification, which is really quite high. And that, coupled with the ability to move the lens and do some creative depth of field, allows you to produce some very unique and interesting macro type shots, particularly when you consider the wider angle of view that a 24 millimeter focal length will provide. Now, I mentioned earlier on in this review that ultimately I was disappointed by this lens, and the reason why I was primarily disappointed is somewhat shocking to me and is outside of my experience with any other lens that I have ever used or tested from Samyang or Rokinon, and that is the image quality is weak. It is, to me, it is very soft, wide open. It's very soft, still stopped down to f4, still somewhat at f5.6, really to achieve acceptable results. I would say that this lens to me is only useful between the apertures of about f8 and f11. It will go on to up to f22, but anywhere past f11, diffraction will begin to cause a diminishing of image quality once again. And so if I were to own this lens or to shoot this lens, I would basically only be shooting at apertures of f8 and f11, which once again means you're definitely limited in most situations to shooting from a tripod. At wider apertures, the lens has a hazy look to it, has low contrast, a lack of critical sharpness of actually rendering detail that I find personally unacceptable. If we were talking about a wide aperture prime lens like a 50 millimeter lens, there might be some artistic applications for that dreamy quality, but that's just not the case with a tilt shift lens. One of the reasons why people buy a tilt shift lens is because they are typically very, very sharp. And so they make great landscape lenses. They make great architectural lenses because they render that fine detail. Unless it's stopped down to f8 or to f11, I just find that this lens doesn't perform. I've produced some beautiful images with it, but really only at those kinds of focal lengths. It also, another kind of downside is that it does not come with a lens hood. And while lens hoods can be a bit complicated because of the movement of the tilt and the shift action, this lens really probably needs a lens hood, because if you're using it outdoors, which it's going to be used a lot there other than shooting interiors, it tends to be a bit flare prone if there is light that's entering into the sensor. And of course that further limits its usefulness to me as a landscape lens. My conclusion after my time spent with this lens is that I personally find this lens to be more trouble than what it's worth. Now, if you are very interested in trying out tilt and shift and what it can do for you, and you're not interested in the high entry price, this lens certainly is much cheaper than the Canon equivalent. The Canon lens is around $2,000, and this lens retails for around $850. And so it's a much more reasonable alternative, and so it might appeal to some of you that are looking for the tilt shift effect, and you're looking to shoot at an f8 or f11 aperture anyway. But if that's not the case, and you're looking for a lens that is going to be great optically and have a lot more flexibility for example, for creative depth of field use, then you will probably be better served in saving your money and saving up and buying the Canon equivalent. I do have hopes that should this lens actually sell enough copies to encourage a second generation. Canon made huge strides from its Mark I to its Mark II 24mm tilt shift equivalent. And so there's always hope that Samyang or Rokinon can make that similar jump ahead with a second generation. I'm somewhat skeptical, however, that this lens will sell enough copies to warrant a second generation of this particular lens. It's very rare for me to give a negative review, but in this case, the diminished optics and some of the other shortcomings that come with the lens in terms of its actual operation make me inclined to say that this is not a lens that I would personally be interested in adding to my kit. If you would like to read more information and to see more samples, you can look at the thorough written review at my website. The linkage is below. And if you haven't already subscribed, there will be many more reviews coming your way. So keep watching. Have a great day. Thank you for your time.